101 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. A reminder that all comments today should be addressed through the chair, conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108 of the regulations, the committee resumed consideration of Report 1, Arrive Can, referred to the committee on Monday, February 12th.
We have a full house here. From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General, nice to see you. Thank you for being here. Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, Sami Hanouch, Principal, Lucie Després, Director. And from the Public Health Agency of Canada, and again, thank you all for being here today as well, Heather Jeffrey, President, Martin Krumens, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, and Luc Brisebois, Acting Vice President, Health, Security, and Regional Operations. The two departments, or the two agencies, will each have 5 minutes. Ms. Hogan, Ms. Jeffrey, you have 5 minutes. I'll begin with the Auditor General, and then we'll proceed to a round of questionings. Over to you, Ms. Hogan. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, thank you for again inviting us to discuss our report on Arrive Can, which we released last week on the 12th of February. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The audit examined whether the Canada Border Services Agency, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and Public Services and Procurement Canada managed all aspects of the Arrive Can application in a way that delivered value for money. I will focus my remarks today on the role played by the Public Health Agency of Canada.
I stated last week, problems in Arrive Can's design, implementation, oversight, and accountability began early on. Confusion between the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency about their respective roles and responsibilities for the application led to an accountability void that persisted for close to a year and a half. Each believed that the other was responsible for establishing a governance structure, and neither developed or implemented good project management practices, such as developing objectives and goals, and budgets and cost estimates. It's not clear to me how you can responsibly manage spending without a budget or track progress without goals. The Public Health Agency of Canada was the business owner of ArriveCan until April 1st, 2022. At that date, ownership and responsibilities for ArriveCan were transferred permanently to the Canada Border Services Agency. In our view, the Public Health Agency, as the business owner, was responsible for establishing the governance structure. Deficiencies in the Public Health Agency of Canada's management of contracts contributed to our concerns about value for money. We found that the agency awarded a professional services tax authorization without using a non-competitive approach. We found no documentation of the initial communications or the reasons why the agency did not consider or select other eligible contractors to carry out the work. Nous avons également constaté.
We also found that while the original contract included milestones with clear deliverables and pricing, it was later amended and replaced with less specific deliverables to allow for more flexibility. In addition, the agency did not set out specific tasks, levels of effort, and deliverables for those contracts in task authorizations. In support of transparency and accountability in the use of public funds, the Public Health Agency of Canada should fully document its interactions with potential contractors and the reasons for decisions made during non-competitive procurement processes. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We look forward to answering all questions from the committee. Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan.
5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee today to discuss the report of the Auditor General on the development of the ArriveCan application. I'm pleased to join you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm joined today by my colleagues Martin Crimmins, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of the Corporate Management Branch, and Luc Brisebois, Acting Vice President of the Health Security and Regional Operations Branch. Au nom de l'Agence de la Santé Publique du Canada.
On behalf of the Public Health Agency of Canada, I would like to thank the Auditor General and her team for their work. We welcome this report.
The ARIVECAN app took place in the context of Canada's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Public Health Agency identified the need for an application of this nature stemming from the public health requirement to put measures in place to reduce the introduction and spread of COVID-19 and its variants into Canada. A series of border measures using emergency orders under the Quarantine Act required the collection of public health information from travelers. Initially, this information was collected using a paper form. Due to the volume of travelers entering Canada, the paper forms quickly became operationally inefficient, creating a significant backlog of data and contributing to traveler lineups at airports and border crossings. This made it difficult to fully administer the border measures while still ensuring essential travel and transit of people and critical goods. At the request of the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Canadian Border Services Agency developed an application to digitize this process. This was critical to Canada's ability to rapidly assess, and respond to COVID-19 as it evolved. It allowed the Public Health Agency to better model COVID-19 spread, severity, and trends, to identify variants of concern and travelers from higher risk countries, and to initiate exemptions for essential workers. It informed border measures and subsequently facilitated the safe resumption of international travel. Bien que la vérificatrice générale est...
While the Auditor General concluded that the speed and quality of the information collected was greatly improved by the ARIVECAN application, the report outlined serious areas of concern in relation to the processes and controls around the application's development.
Canada fully accepts the recommendation that the agency should document interactions with potential contractors as well as the reasons for decisions made during non-competitive procurement processes. We are strengthening our existing guidance and supporting tools and putting in place training with respect to these file documentation requirements. The recommendation directed to the agency also calls for a process to be put in place to ensure compliance with the requirements of contracting policies. The Public Health Agency is updating all of its quality assurance protocols to ensure that these requirements are fully and consistently met. Finally, the findings point to the importance of formally documenting roles and responsibilities at the outset of a project, rather than at a later stage, as was the case with the ARIVECAN application. We believe this finding to be particularly important in the context of emergency response, and it is being incorporated into our preparedness and contingency plans for future emergencies. Thank you. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to our first questioner. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor for up to 6 minutes, please.
The Auditor General said, and I quote, "The Public Health Agency of Canada did not develop project objectives and goals, budgets and cost estimates, assessments of resource needs, or risk management activities." Ms. Jeffrey, did you develop a budget for ARIVECAN?
There was governance established around ARIVECAN, but it focused on the public health deliverables and the nature of the border measures that needed to be put in place and operationalized through the app.
Okay,
but there was no overall project budget established, as should have been the case in IT projects.
No budget. Was there a projection of the expected cost?
There were initial contracts put in place, but incrementally, as you're aware, those contracts were added to and were administered in sequence. So there was no overarching budget that covered those costs.
Do you believe this failure to have a budget is the reason that the cost of this project ballooned to at least $60 million for taxpayers?
When we look at the situation in Canada in March 2020, it was a novel pandemic, and the timelines and the nature of the response that would be required were not known. This was an evolving situation. I recall when we looked at how...
I appreciate your response, though it is not an answer, and you'll have noted in the Auditor General's report that the pandemic was not an excuse or justification for the rules to be thrown out the window. Your agency owned this app for almost the entirety of the pandemic, and You never developed a cost estimate for it. Did you do any performance reviews on it, quarterly or every 6 months, every year? Did that happen?
The operations of the app were evaluated through a governance structure that included Director General, ADM, and Deputy Management Committees on border services, and we assessed the operational results of the app as we went.
But the cost to Canadians was never included in a single review by your department. Is that correct?
The documentation of the cumulative cost was not a part of the documentation of that governance, correct?
Who is the minister ultimately responsible for the Public Health Agency of Canada?
The Public Health Agency of Canada is part of the health portfolio and reports to the Minister of Health, but the contracts that were put in place were put in place.
Who was the Minister of Health that oversaw the development of the ArriveCAN app?
The ArriveCAN app was jointly developed between the Public Health Agency and the Canadian Border Services Agency.
During the time that the ArriveCAN app was first developed, who was the Minister of Health?
At the outset of the pandemic, the Minister of Health was Minister Haidu.
The Auditor General said your agency was responsible for setting the governance structure, which you referenced, which are the rules, procedures, and processes for ArriveCAN. This was your duty at PHAC. That's correct?
Yes.
If PHAC is part of the health portfolio and the Minister of Health was Minister Haidu, then as the minister, she's responsible for this major failing. There was no good news in the Auditor General's report for the government, for the Ministry of Health, or for the Public Health Agency of Canada in that report. So do you recognize that this is a major failing, this $60 million boondoggle?
Mr. Chair, we certainly recognize that the failure to put in place formal project governance at the outset of this project led to inadequate oversight of the project and meant that the costs were not appropriately tracked as they were developed. And we have put in place numerous measures to ensure that this does not happen again. It was a large public health emergency.
I would say that not only was there a failure, it's not acceptable that they weren't tracked. The total cost, is not acceptable. Initial estimates at $80,000 and ballooning to $60 million with single source contracts and, two guys in a basement being paid, $20 million. These are failures. So the minister failed.
The contracts that were put in place were administered by the department.
So let me just be very clear, Ms. Jeffrey. If this is a failure, who is accountable for departmental failures? Is the minister responsible for what goes on in the department?
As the deputy head of the organization,
who does the deputy head report to?
The deputy head reports to the clerk of the Privy Council and to the minister, depending on the subject, and the authority that's being delegated.
To the minister, and the authority and responsibilities are delegated from the minister. This is the minister's failure, and that's what's been evidenced